Hello and welcome to another week of the LA Times College Football Roundtable. It's rivalry week, USC, UCLA coming up, and to preview that game and review this past weekend's games, Ben Bolch, our UCLA beat writer, joins me. I'm Ryan Kartje, USC beat writer. Ben, you survived the freezing cold press box in Washington. Uh, can't really say much for UCLA in that regard, but glad to see that you made it home safe to the warm.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a brutal game for the Bruins. They looked a lot like they did in starting the season 1-5. Same problems that you thought that they were fixed when that three-game winning streak all cropped back up. Could not run the ball, lots of penalties, and Ethan Garbers, reverted to kind of the form of early season where he's out there running around under a lot of pressure and not hitting guys. He had a couple throws he could have made that would have gone for big gains, including a one or two touchdowns, and just couldn't connect. So kind of a head scratcher at this point in the season. You kind of figure out you know where what a team is and where they are and where they're headed, and they just went in there and kind of laid an egg. So now the stakes could not be any bigger for UCLA going into this rivalry game.
No margin for error left for UCLA in terms of making a bowl game. They have to win out from here. USC, saved its bowl chances by beating Nebraska 28-20 homecoming at the Coliseum. The first game for Jaden Mayava, new quarterback, and I thought, he was solid, albeit maybe a little bit erratic. There were moments he got pretty lucky. Starts with a pick six, obviously. Not an ideal way to open your tenure as USC's quarterback, but bounces back from there, albeit with some iffy stretches. Times in which the ball bounced off of helmets and was caught. Uh, Interceptions that were dropped, some missed receivers. But that said, just the added threat of Jaden Mayava's legs completely changed. It seemed like what USC was able to do on offense. Lincoln Riley finally seemed like he was in his bag as a play caller, and Woody Marks, their solid running back all year, crosses the 1,000-yard threshold, has a career high, 146 yards. So you can see that offense start to change with Jaden Mayava, but he still seems to have a long way to go.
My takeaway was, yes, they won that game, but that's not the way he played that game and the passes he threw. That's not a long-term winning strategy. He can't take as many risks and throw into many tight windows with so many defensive backs around. I mean, how many balls should have been intercepted in that game? Three or four? And then USC gets away with what looked like a hold or a pass interference on the end of the game. They won the game, and I saw him, Jaden Mayava, smiling on the sideline, and I'm wondering, is he smiling because he's like proud or because he's relieved? Because I think that was, they won the game, and, all credit for that, but that's he needs to play a lot better than that. If they're going to win Saturday. I think if he throws those kind of passes again, even against UCLA's defense, I think they're going to get intercepted. So I think there's a lot to tighten up there for USC and Jaden Mayava.
It's funny you'd say that about him being too aggressive. That's actually where Lincoln Riley, where his teammates said they were most impressed, was just by how willing he was to continue going down the field, to continue trying to push passes into tight windows. And he certainly was fearless. I don't think we can say anything other than that, but I agree in the sense that I'm not sure how many times you're going to get away with two critical passes bouncing off of defenders' helmets and being caught. Like if those two passes go differently, maybe that game is different. But I think the one thing too that impressed me the most about this game that probably got overlooked just given the new quarterback situation was USC's defense really did lock down in critical stretches of this game. And, they only allowed 4.8 yards per play. That's the second best performance by that unit all year. They started a couple of freshmen on the edges in Sam Green and Cameron Fountain. And I think it paid dividends. Now, while it didn't really show up as much in the stat sheet, we saw a lot more juice just out of this defense, and that's really been an issue, just getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks all year. And I think that's a perfect lead-in maybe to this next week because Danton Lynn obviously came from UCLA, where he had a great defense, comes to USC And I think it's pretty unequivocal that that defense has improved, but how much, I think, is kind of an interesting question to ask at this point. And meanwhile, you see UCLA just sort of pick up, not right where it left off necessarily, but with Akaika Maloya as defensive coordinator, has certainly stepped in and done an admirable job. So I wonder how both of those sides kind of feel about where their defenses have gone this year.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the stories to week. Dantlin coming back to the Rose Bowl. Can his defense shut down Ethan Garbers and keep UCLA's run game in check? I mean, I think if we both had to assess Dantlin versus Akaika Malloy and the job they've done this season, I think we both would have to say Akaika Malloy has done a better job. I don't think there's any doubt about it, just based on what he had to work with and where people thought this defense was headed. And they've become, if not, a credible unit, probably the strength of this UCLA team has been the defense. So he's done an amazing job. I know, Dan Lynn is a very solid coordinator, and I still think he's a rising star in the industry. So want to give him his credit as well. But I just think that Akaika Malloy is probably one of the most unsung assistant coaches in the country this year, based on what he's done with what he had to work with. Now, Carson Swessinger has emerged as, a Buckus Award semifinalist. They've got Jay Toya, who was just really treating the Washington offensive linemen like rag dolls in the second half, which was really interesting to see. So that will be interesting. And then let's talk a little bit about Deshaun Foster. I mean, he played in this rivalry game. I think he's going to be really driven to win this game. I'm writing a story for later in the week about how, USC wanted him as a defensive back. And then he went out there in the first rivalry game he played in 1998 and went for 4 touchdowns. So he's always has a little bit of extra motivation in this rivalry game, and I think that's going to continue on Saturday.
Meanwhile, I think Lincoln Riley's kind of the opposite when it comes to a game like this. Historically, it's kind of de-emphasized the more rivalry aspects of this game. So both teams have a lot on the line. I did want to push back a little bit on one thing that you mentioned. I think I'm a bit of a Dan Lynn apologist this season, if only for the fact that USC didn't have a lot to work with. In terms of the pass rush, not a lot of depth. The defensive line was very thin. They lost their best player early on in the season to concussions, and Eric Gentry, who really looked like one of the best defenders in the Big Ten early on in the season. So I think losing those difference makers, he's had to do a lot to just make USC's defense look okay. I think the creative ways he's found ways to do that, I think deserve some credit. But although I don't think he's suddenly turned this defense into the standout unit that maybe UCLA was, obviously, a year ago. But in terms of how these two teams match up, Ben, how do obviously USC is coming off a good week, UCLA is coming off a week in which they took a step back. How much do you think just motivation is going to matter in this game? Who is the more motivated team? I know we talked about the coaches, but is there any way that this UCLA offense can really make this USC defense, which we've talked about some of its issues, pay in this game?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's talk about Ethan Garbers, the starting quarterback for UCLA. He went into the Coliseum last year and played one of his best games, and they won that game going away 38-20. And so he knows the challenge. He's been in this game before. I expect him to play one of his better games this year. I think he's going to be motivated. It's going to be his last rivalry game at the Rose Bowl. He understands that this is the kind of game legacies are made from. So he'll want to have a great showing there. As far as UCLA's defense, their strength is against the run. So I think Woody Marks is going to have a challenge there. So I think that you put those factors together. I think there's a lot of soft factors that favor the Bruins in this one.
I do think Jaden Mayava, with a week under his belt, obviously he started off pretty shaky in this past game, 2 of 7 with a pick 6. But from there, 23 of 28, a couple touchdowns. I think he comes out a little bit stronger in this game. How do you feel about UCLA's secondary in general? Have they improved as the season's gone along?
It's been up and down. I think Brian Addison, the transfer from Oregon, has been the standout. He's done a great job on the back end of cleaning a lot of stuff up. Cornerback play has been kind of spotty. Some guys like Devin Kirkwood have kind of faded into kind of reserve roles, but I think there's enough there and enough scouting based off of having that one, first game that Jade Mayava had and his tendencies that I think they'll hold up just fine in the secondary.
USC would be smart to lean on the run as they have been all year, even though UCLA is a stout run defense. That's what they hang their hats on. But I just see this game coming down to both of these quarterbacks trying to throw deep, and whichever one of those big plays, connects more often, that team is going to come away with a win.
Yeah, I think to your point, like you have to get hyped up for the rivalry, but you also have to play within yourself, right? I mean, one of Ethan Garber's problems all year is he's been trying to do too much hero ball, and that's hurt him. He's tried to like throw balls into tight windows. It hasn't worked out, and that's the type of tendency you just can't have in a game like this because it's gonna, it's basically a coin flip game, and one bad decision like that could swing the game in the other team's favor. So, have emotion, but play within yourselves. I think that should be kind of like the mantra for both of these teams.
Big plays and turnovers. I think that's what this game comes down to. But Ben, on that note, need a prediction from you. I know the road team has won this game quite a bit in recent years. Is it this another year in which the road team comes in victorious?
I don't think so. I think this, as I tweeted out after the SC game, this game reminds me a lot of the 2018 game where SC came in 5-5, UCLA, not having a great year under a first year coach, but still a lot to prove and eager to prove themselves at home. And I think that they are with Deshaun Foster, and I think that kind of stuff does matter. So I'm gonna go out and say UCLA is gonna win this game. I'm gonna go 28-21.
I feel the same way. I think that USC's, proclivity potentially to turnovers in this game could come back to bite them. You know, I do think if they're able to force some turnovers with Garbers, if he is, trying too hard to make something happen, that this game could very quickly turn in USC's direction. And I could see either team, even winning by two touchdowns in this game. I don't think that's impossible, but I think UCLA, just motivation wise, has a lot more riding on this game. It's at home, like you said, Deshaun Foster, a lot of motivation in this one. So I think UCLA pulls out a very close one. Let's say 31-27. It's going to be a busy week for both of us. Not only the rivalry week coming up Saturday, a lot of basketball happening. I know we'll jump into basketball here in a couple weeks, depending on if either of our teams make a bowl game. But Ben, a couple weeks left. Any thoughts as we enter this final home stretch?
Both teams fighting for bowl eligibility, and one of us will probably be either headed to Shreveport for the Independence Bowl or El Paso for the Sun Bowl. So let's revisit that and see if I was right. I think those are the two possibilities, most realistic possibilities for teams that are going to finish 6-6. Because let's be honest, I think that's the ceiling for both teams because SC's got Notre Dame after this week. I don't think they're going to win that one. So UCLA needs to win both games to get to 6-6. If they beat USC, I think they'll beat Fresno at home, even though Fresno has won 4 in a row in that series, which is an amazing stat. But so let's get those. Let's pre-book some refundable trips to Shreveport and El Paso.
Shreveport and El Paso, beautiful this time of year. So thank you again for joining us, College Football Roundtable. We'll be back to break down the results of the Crosstown rivalry.